Hello everyone, lecture number 7 in that series of lectures about thought as word dynamics. This is part of a reflection in artificial intelligence. It is a theory that lies behind the software I developed in the late 80s and has been revived recently, called ANELA, Associative Network with Emergent Logical and Learning Abilities, which I developed in those years for British Telecom. We've reached the chapter 6 of my report. We've established so far that memory is probably stored in the brain, and that there's a high likelihood that where it's stored, I explained why. And the place where it is stored is most probably the network of neurons we have in the mind. And when we're talking now of artificial neurons, it is based on the same assumption. That's a good way to store memories within a particular on a particular substrate, being a network. What I established in the just prior lecture, the one called number 7, which was chapter 5 of my report, is that the most likely way that memory is stored within our brain, within the network that holds it, the most likely way it is stored is in the form, under the shape of word pairs. Why word pairs instead of just words? Because as Aristotle suggested it, a truth can be assigned to an idea composed of two words put together and not to a single word. And I added, in the wake of the reflection by Sigmund Freud, that it is also the word pair to which an emotion can be attached, and the underlying mechanics of ANELA is the idea that it is through a gradient descent of a space made out of words that produces the thoughts or sentences we exchange with the rest of the world, or inner speech when we're talking to ourselves. There is a lexicon which is stored in our mind, and any speech utterance, any thought is actually establishing a path within that space of words, a restricted part of it. Of course, anybody who would try to speak out the whole lexicon, of course, would be regarded as having a problem called logorrhea, not being able to stop. Chapter 6. It's entitled, Each Such Word Pair Has at Any Time an Affect Value Attached to It. The Stoic logicians held that every representation has an author, and that no representation should be considered separately from its author's assent. According to Sextus Empiricus, a true representation is one of which it is possible to make a true assertion in the present moment. That is to say, that interpretation needs to take into account not only the determination of the action as to its occurrence and its objects, but also the determination of the action as to its witness, the assent of the person who's talking about these things. All utterances have an author who commits his person or her person in varying degrees to what is said by him or her. I repeat that. All utterances have an author who commits his person or her person in varying degrees to what he or she says. While his quality, his status, competence determines for other locutors to what extent they can question these utterances and negotiate their content as prospective shared knowledge. When we talk to each other, we're trying to establish shared knowledge. When we just utter it, we propose it as prospective shared knowledge, because it needs our assent to the two of us to what is being said to make it happen. If I say, personally, I believe that the Earth is flat, and not being too sure of what you will reply, and that you say, oh yeah, that's a fact as far as I'm concerned, then you can go on, we can all both go on saying that, well, since it's something that we know, we stop using the word believe. We decide that we know it because it has become shared knowledge to us, right? We held it separately, but we didn't know it was shared knowledge. To each representation that we hold, we assent in a specific manner. We don't believe as strongly in all we know. We're not prepared to put our reputation at stake in a similar way with all we feel like saying. The way we express our assent to the words we utter expresses the degree in which we identify with them, staking our support without person, spanning from the non-committal report of a fact in a quotation to the expression of a genuine belief. I can say I believe in God, which is one thing. I can say also, I've heard somebody mentioning that he personally believes in God. It's not the same degree of assent. It's not the same degree of being able to predisposed, being open to negotiate around what has been expressed. The truth or falseness and the number of possible degrees between these polar values of a word pair is stored along with it. We associate to a word pair an emotional value which our interlocutor, the person we speak to, can assess on his side or her side as being true or false. Wittgenstein gives an example of that. I open the quotes. Imagine that someone is a believer and says, I believe in the final judgment. And I reply, well, I'm not too sure, it's possible. You would say there's an abyss between our views. Should he say, it's a German airplane flying above us, and I would say, it's possible, I'm not too sure. You would say that our views are pretty close. This is something that Wittgenstein writes in the 1930s. He lives in England, he lives in Cambridge, and there's the occurrence of, possible occurrence of German planes in the sky. We're not in war already, but people may be more or less, I would say, emotional about the fact of recognizing that there's a German airplane just right above. The reason why dissenting slightly with the opinion expressed by someone about the final judgment or the presence of a German airplane reveal in one case a hostile rebuff and in the other only a minor difference. This resides in the effect values attached to either belief by the one who holds it. When we speak of the final judgment, there's a high emotional value about that. If the person who expresses it, the person who says maybe it's a German airplane above, well, I mean, yeah, there's some emotional value because we're in the war, the days before the Second World War, but it's not as high. There's no such high commitment as when expressing what we believe about religious issues. The strong identification of a speaker with his views on the final judgment renders any questioning of his opinion a rejection. Conversely, his minor adhesion with the idea that there's a German plane above him makes any challenge of the view innocuous. It is the association of affect values with word pairs that led to the development of the psychotherapeutic technique of induced association, between inverted commas. One word is proposed as an inductor and the subject is asked to come up, refraining as much as possible from thinking, also between inverted commas, with another word as a response. I say one word, you have to reply with another, refraining as much as possible from thinking. The condition that the association should be uninhibited by conscious censorship is supposed to ensure that the first word pair retrieved is the one with the highest emotional value for the subject. In some early experiments around that idea by Jung and Ricklin, One subject would associate father with drunk and piano with horrible. Jung commented, the cement that holds together such complex, the word pair, is the affect which these ideas hold in common. The Jung I'm talking about here is Carl Jung, who before being a dissenting psychoanalyst of a mystical kind of nature, he was very much one of the pioneers in these methods of free association or induced association. It's him who's writing there. He did some of that work together with Ricklin in the very early years of the 20th century. And so when you say father and the person replies drunk, when you say piano and the person replies with horrible, you have high emotional values attached to the word. The other association might be more non-committal, like saying mother when somebody says father, or saying music when somebody says piano. The first principle of association is similarly in affective value. Memories, i.e. memory traces, are linked to each other through the sensations which compose them and which they are sharing. Such network links allow recollection, the evocation of a memory. Any memory has a potential to represent itself in its whole, i.e. as a configuration of sensations which were initially perceived simultaneously. When I say presentation, I mean at the same time represent, understood as both presenting itself anew for a second time and as representation. Every sensation has a double ability, that of getting imprinted as a memory, i.e. as a configuration of correlated simultaneous sensations, and that of evoking, on a stage traditionally called imagination, all memories to which it partakes. Memory allows, therefore, a sensation to generate within imagination a deferred representation of its former instances. For example, the trumpeting of an elephant evokes within imagination the image of the animal as well as the fear it inspires when it charges. It is such a network of affect values linked to the satisfaction of our basic needs and deposited as layered memories of appropriate and inappropriate response that allows imagination to unfold, to stage simulations of attempts at solution. What makes The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe an appealing title? That in the context of a child's world, the threesome brings up similar emotional response and are therefore conceptually linked. The emotional association is the prototypical manner in which stuffs are associated because they elicit similar emotional response. I'm quoting from Ralph Bulmer, who wrote about the birds of Kalam County, with his informer called Majneb. I start a quote. Birds of mystical importance are likely to include representatives of two broad groups. Those that normally maintain a considerable distance from man, many may be relatively rare, and which are selected for complex reasons, but when encountered unexpectedly, are likely to be interpreted in highly mystical ways. And those that interact regularly and spontaneously with man and whose mystical significance derives mainly from the nature of the interactions. In the latter category are birds who call at man in the gardens and are taken as manifestations of ghosts, including some seen as bringing messages due to their chattering in a human-like manner. In the former category are birds who unpredictably and mysteriously startle man and disappear elusively, and are taken to be witches. In addition, birds of mystical significance are often the most salient and numerous species in the classificatory groups in which they occur. Here, a great example of how emotion is behind the way we think and the way we speak when we mention things, determining that some birds are ghosts and some other are witches, which is not the way that we usually think in Europe. Although there are strong associations between fear and owls, and the barn owl in particular, because of its very strange ways and quite a way of shrieking and of heaving. I tremble as I mentioned it. To any particular subject, a word like apple corresponds to the acoustic imprint apple, and to the visual imprint of the word apple, composed of the letters A-P-P-L-E. It is generally assumed that the subject would have an emotional response to a word like apple. But what the technique of induced association shows is that words act in word pairs. People therefore don't have any particular feelings about apple. It all depends on the particular apple. The affect value attached to apple of my eye is likely to be different from that attached to the apple that Eve handed to Adam. While the apple in pears that one is not supposed to compare is likely to be pretty indifferent to most of us. These various apples, sure enough, are called apple, but apart from this identity in sound, which the medieval logicians called material, they don't share much else. Emotional response to such various apples is too different for their identity as acoustic imprints to be more than a superficial likeness rather than a substantive one. Material, between inverted commas, is the word applied by the medieval logicians to such likeness in sound or in writing. Material as opposed to substantial, that would apply to the likeness in meaning. The elements in the network are therefore likely to be the word pairs where apple meets sometimes my eye, sometimes Eve, and sometimes pears. Each of these has an identity of its own, a very special affective value attached to it. It is this affect value that holds the word pair together, like the forces holding the quarks within an elementary particle, and explains why each half acts as a handle for the other half of the word pair, was shown by Jung and Ricken in the induction by word. The stronger the affect value, the more inseparable the halves of the word pair. It is the strength of the association that induced association exploits to draw a psychological diagnosis. Practically, the assumption that there is effectively speaking more than one type of apple for a speaking subject suffices to relieve ambiguity, which is a classical difficulty in a subfield of artificial intelligence known as knowledge representation. How can a piece of software distinguish the fruit kiwi from the bird kiwi? It cannot, as long as computers don't attach affect values to word pairs. Unless someone does it on his behalf, of course. That is what I did with Anella. I simulated affect values assigned to word pairs and being modified dynamically through speech or performance. I'd add as a note that currently in the large language models, the affect value is ignored. It is replaced by statistical connections, by the fact that by going back through the transformer, going back to as many words as the ambiguity can be relieved is the way it's done, which is, as underlined, is a dumb manner, but effective. I agree, it's effective, a dumb manner to mimic the emotional dynamics which is underlying it, and which in a bottom-up approach like that of Anella you can actually implement. If elephants are no more than elephants, like an apple, irrespective of what kind of apple it is, there is no way to disambiguate a sentence like, I saw an elephant flying over New York. But if elephants show up in distinct word pairs, the ambiguity is automatically relieved. The elephants in New York Zoo do not belong to the same word pairs as Dumbo, the flying elephant. Thank you so much for your attention. This is the end of lecture number 7. I hope to see you soon for lecture number 8. Thank you so much.